Good morning, everyone. It's great to have you back here. It means you found yesterday an interesting event, and you didn't get scared by all the different digital archival terms. We are happy to present you a different format of presentation today. This morning panel is a roundtable, and I would like you all to imagine that we are all sitting around one big table, because these presentations, you see there are many more panelists than usually. They will have short report-like presentations, 10 minutes each, and we will try to keep them on track and not let them go over time. And then we hope that we will have a longer discussion. I know that many representatives from other archival institutions, at least in Alberta, were willing to join but couldn't make it for different reasons. And some couldn't present but could attend, and I hope if you are one of them, please participate. Please ask questions, doubt, question, participate in any way you can, because this is why we are here, and this is why this is a roundtable. Andrij Makuch and myself are going to be moderators of this roundtable, and we will help facilitate the discussion afterwards. I would like to name just a few institutions who did express their interest of joining this roundtable, but couldn't make it. One of them is the Ukrainian Museum of Canada from Skakun. I received information from the Canadian Society for Ukrainian Labor Research. They also sent the description of their collections because they have a lot of Ukrainian materials that could be of interest to researchers present here. We received information from BC, Ukrainian Cultural Center, and from the consultant group who are archivists who help them manage their collection, organize their collection, and create a website and make it available online. And also, we got in touch with the American Network for Ukrainian Heritage, who are trying to do something similar as we are doing here today, yesterday, and tomorrow, to create a network of Ukrainian heritage institutions in order to, foster collaboration and help each other. Because we do have a lot of knowledge, we have skills, and we can share them. Okay, I'll let you introduce the first presenter.
The first presenter then is Andrij Makuch. He's a research coordinator of the Cool Ukrainian Canadian Studies Center at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. He's also working on the Holodomor research project. He has lots of experience in doing a variety of research. He's worked for years also on the Encyclopedia of Ukraine, and many of us know him from many of his projects. Andrij.
Do I get a mic or do I?
Yes,
oh, okay.
There are two. So
I'd like to start by giving a more accurate title to my presentation: The Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies and the Ukrainian-Canadian Archives Question, a personal and institutional perspective. The personal aspect arises from some of my own experiences in dealing with archival matters as research coordinator for the Ukrainian-Canadian program, later we'll just call it the Cool Center. These were more active in the 2000s, and to some degree they were bracketed by the follow-up to a report or action plan on Ukrainian archives in Canada, prepared by Oris Grukyak in 2003 for the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, and the appearance of Irena Matyash's Archivna Ukraineka в Канаді, Довідник, a guide to Ukrainian archives in Canada in 2010. The institutional perspective arises from the fact that, one, Ukrainian-Canadian studies constitute one of the quote-unquote pillars of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, raison d'être. And two, primary sources are, as somebody labeled them yesterday, the lifeblood of scholarly research. As such, KIUS, and in particular the Cool Ukrainian Canadian Studies Center, cannot but be concerned about Ukrainian archives in Canada. I will not be speaking, with one exception, about KIUS activity with respect to its own archive. This will be addressed by Aleksandr Makar and Victoria Yakovleva in a different session. As I mentioned earlier, in 2003, Oris Krugliak prepared a report, Ukrainian-Canadian Archives, an overview and recommendation for action for the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. Krugliak, a recently retired bureaucrat who had held high-level positions in the federal government in the areas of heritage, culture, and multiculturalism, and served for a time as director of the multiculturalism program, was well qualified to compile such a document. Krugliak's report included an action plan for the establishment and this is quoting here, the establishment by UCC of a national coordinating committee on archives, as well as a comprehensive survey on Ukrainian archives in Canada. The Krugliak report spurred the organization of an archival gathering in Winnipeg in March 2003, at which some 20 stakeholders were present. By then, the initiative had lost some of its immediate political muscle and its momentum, and it sort of lay dormant until May 2004, at the time of the Learneds, that the Learneds were being held in Winnipeg. On that occasion, the Ukrainian Academy of Arts and Sciences in Canada, commonly known as UVAN, organized a panel discussion to discuss the Krugliak proposals. And this very much seems to have been the initiative of Professor Yaroslav Rozumny of the University of Manitoba. The discussion at the session affirmed the desire and the need for some kind of an archival committee or network, and several options were suggested. A UCC committee, and this was recommended by Krugliak, a totally separate, unaffiliated professional institutional group, an institutional/community group with a UCC mandate, a committee of the Canadian Association for Ukrainian Studies, or a subcommittee of the UCC's existing Ukrainian Studies Committee. Nothing was resolved at the meeting itself. In a follow-up letter, or meeting overview, I posed the organizing issue to some of the key participants from both gatherings, stating that the Ukrainian-Canadian program, and particularly myself, would be willing to take the lead on any such initiative, headed initially pending regional representation in Alberta, Saskatchewan, / Manitoba and Ontario, and the annual rotation of a chair for any group that might be established. It did not happen, and I'm just wondering whether in the age of Skype and easy teleconferencing, something other might have been possible. All the same, we, that is the Ukrainian Canadian program, continued to deal with the archival field. I started gathering information on Ukrainian archival holdings in Canada in the course of business travels around the country. So, what was at the time the National Archives of Canada, Saskatchewan Archives, Provincial Archives of Alberta, Osaradok, the Winnipeg Ukrainian Labor Temple, scouting out the Ukrainian holdings of the Archives of Ontario and establishing contacts with archivists there. And for a time, we would occasionally visit with Irina Vinnytska, the archivist at the Ukrainian Canadian Research and Documentation Center, to the archives to see, what was happening with the Ukrainian holdings. Checking out the status of the organizational records of various Ukrainian Canadian community groups, notably the Ukrainian National Federation, and a section of the historic records of the Ukrainian Labor Farmer Temple Association that had not been deposited at the Library and Archives Canada, and the Peter Prokop or Prokopchuk papers that eventually made their way to the Museum of Civilization. Also looking at, inquiring about the records of the Chitayna Prasvita and the Ukrainian National Home in Winnipeg as they were closing up their operations. Also querying about the state of oral history collections at the Multicultural History Society of Ontario, Manitoba Museum of Man and Nature, and the Cecil Ross Society, which had conducted an extensive interview program on the Communist Party of Canada, and it included about 60 Ukrainian interviews in there. So we had a fair interest in I guess the state of Ukrainian archives in Canada. We also undertook the digitization of this Kyiv's oral history project that was taped interviews with approximately 140 Ukrainian Canadian community figures, mainly from the interwar period. We also had a number of forays into archival film. Time being limited, I won't mention them all. The most interesting one was I was trying to find the films or film footage of Ukrainian Canadians that had been done by Lev Solenko under his pseudonym Orle Hora. And unfortunately, I ended up in the triangle of frustration that I told one party, they told me to get a hold of the other party told me to get a hold back to the first party, and by the time Solenko died in 2008, nothing had been resolved. I also had some inconclusive queries about the Saluk films that were done in the 1950s. Did have some success with an earlier film director, Dmytro Palyuk, and also assisting the Ukrainian Canadian Research and Documentation Center in placing over 100 Soviet-era Ukrainian documentary films, a good number of them with an overtly propagandistic tone. Sort of one of my favorite titles is "Their Trade is Treason." It's salacious, and not salacious, but it shows attitude. Anyways, we managed to get those deposited into the newly created University of Film Archives, Toronto Film Archives. We also had a fair amount of dealing with Ukrainian scholars coming to work in Canadian archives. The most notable of these was Irena Matyash, the head of the Ukrainian Research Institute for the Study of Archival Matters and Records, who in 2006-2007, with Kyiv's support, both financial and logistical, undertook a general survey of Ukrainian archives in Canada. The end results, again with considerable Kyiv's backing, and part of this was I guess financial in terms of helping to publish the book, but also in supplying personnel, two people out of four who were checking the organizational names and personal names to make sure that, because not all names of the Ukrainian organization in English can be translated directly into Ukrainian or vice versa. So you have to be careful with that. There are additional items I could add from a personal perspective, but time is running out. We did have a large archival project for microfilming newspapers at one time. We published, given grants for archival work, and published research reports of finding aids for archival holdings. Our activity tapered off to a certain degree after 2010, with when we finally had a guide to Ukrainian archives in Canada. But it is never ceased, and we are looking forward to seeing the results. What comes out of this gathering. And with that, I will end this word from one of the event's co-sponsors.
Thank you, Andrij, and thank you very much for your perfect timing. The next presenters are Vivian Skakun. She has a B.Ed from the University of Alberta. She's written articles for the National Ukrainian Women's Association, Promin, and she's quite interested in archives, partially because of she was asked to write a brief history of the provincial Soyuz Ukrainian law and discovered lots of things about their provincial archives. Her co-presenter is Kathy Buchanan. She's worked for the federal and the provincial government in Alberta, and received awards there. She has held lots of executive positions at the National Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada, also at the provincial and at the branch level. She has been very active in international projects doing charitable work in Ukraine and won awards for a variety of things, the Soroptimist Ruby Award for Women Helping Women in 2014. Currently, Kathy is the archivist for the Alberta Provincial Executive of that organization. There we go.
Good morning.
I'll bring it for you.
Challenges of obtaining, storing, and uncovering existing archives of the Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada, Alberta Provincial Executive, and of Alberta branches. This presentation consists of two parts. First, we will highlight our issues and challenges.
And secondly, we will share ideas for the future.
Our organization consists of three levels: national, provincial, and local.
And we will represent the provincial branch. The purpose of the Ukrainian Women's Association Canada organization, or SOUS, is best represented by the smolska, or the torch. This insignia symbolizes passing on the torch of our love of our church, our faith, our culture, and our heritage to the next generation.
I'm wearing a small skip, and so for the next few slides, we'll just be going through what that small skip represents. It represents the ardor of our love for our people,
For our faith,
for our church,
our customs, language, literature, art, music, and scholarship,
never to be extinguished,
but passed on to those who follow in our steps.
discovering the state of the Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada, Alberta Archives. By January 2015, the National Ukrainian Women's Association President, Dr. Geraldine Nakonechny, requested that I, as President of the Alberta Ukrainian Women's Association Provincial, write the history for the years 1976 to 2001 for the National History book that is still to be published. When I checked with the provincial SOUS archives, I discovered that the minutes for that time frame, the program books, and the annual reports were not in the collection. The primary sources that were in the collection were missing and unaccounted for. This is when our provincial executive realized the state of our archives.
The archives have been moved to various locations. Currently, they are housed in a room in the upper level of the Ukrainian Orthodox Cultural Center of St. John the Baptist. This is a meeting room for the Ukrainian Self-Reliance Association Edmonton branch and is called the TUS room. The conditions in this room are not controlled for humidity, temperature, light, or other such archival standards. Space is limited and proper shelving is lacking.
Continuing with issues and challenges, archival collection. As I previously stated, archives are not available for that particular year. More recent minutes are in binders. The contents have not been called for relevance or organized. Existing archives require organizing, cataloging, and documenting to be useful as finding aids. Early archives are all written in Ukrainian. These require translation for access as more and more members are not proficient in the Ukrainian language.
The other issue is human resources. Volunteers, they serve 2 years or 4 years, and this makes long-term commitment difficult.
Sorry, continue.
No formal training is provided. Deciding what is relevant, how to organize information and documentation is required if the archives are to be accessible as finding aids. For consistency, volunteers require a written policy or document to guide them as to what and how items are filed or documented.
Continuing with human resources, items can be removed from the TUS room without any sign out procedure. If archival material is removed and not returned, there is no way of recovering them. Trusting our membership to return them is no longer acceptable. We have not recognized the value of archives. They are important as archives reveal the purpose of our organization, our history, and all the accomplishments made within changing macro system. The founding members' main goal was to unite women to promote access to secondary education and establish rights and equality of women. The motto for our Suizankia is "In education lies our strength." This still applies today. Our future depends on taking the best of the past and building on the foundation as we move to the future. Otherwise, we are in danger of losing our identity as we are assimilated in a globalized and secularized world. I'm still here.
The other issue is our Constitution. If provincial and regional executives or local branches dissolve, all existing records and assets are to be held in trust by the National UWAC Executive for a 5-year period. After the 5 years have passed, the National Executive has the option of disposing of the assets in whatever manner deemed necessary. This Constitution does not provide any information as to what will happen to the archives after the 5 years have passed. Further, if the National UWAC Association passes a resolution to dissolve, then it is left to the National Executive to administer the process of dissolution. It is not clear what happens to the National Archives if National UWAC ever dissolves.
Conditions of National Archives are similar to that of Alberta Provincial Archives. National Archives has no permanent location. It depends on volunteers to do all the work. The conditions are not according to archival standards. Closed branches are not, the archives of closed branches are not available. The requirement to send archives to National Ukrainian Women's Association is an issue. Family members feel a sense of ownership. I have a copy of the Spedden minutes that were recorded. This is a personal copy. The person who last recorded the minutes was Ivhania Umenchuk from Spedden, Alberta. And so we have many branches that are actually closed. We have no idea what's happened to the archives, where they are. And so that is a major issue. So that's just a sample of things left in personal homes.
And it's all in Ukrainian, so it doesn't do me a lot of good.
Okay. So I still have to do this thing. Am I at the right place? No.
Yeah, right. You're right.
No, but
now.
I'm looking over there.
That's where we're now.
But my frame isn't there. Oh,
Yes,
so,
it is. Okay, there.
okay. Sorry about that.
Okay, the provincial has not been involved with re-engaging branches when they close. And you can refer to our handout later on. After we're done here, and you can refer to that.
So we have a handout that has 3 appendices in it, and it includes our presentation in more detail. Continuing with the frame here. Archives are left in church basements, halls, and private residences of former Suizankia. These are often destroyed, especially when someone passes away and family members are left to take care of everything and without ever thinking that their value are thrown out, destroyed, damaged, whatever. We also have some guidelines that we could use as a guide, but they also, from national and provincial, but they also need to be more improved. Next is plans for the future.
So the 3 levels at national, provincial, and branch organizations require coordination in responding to the crisis of archives. It can't just be one person going off on their own. It has to be a combined effort. We have assets in Alberta such as the Bohdan Medwitsky Ukrainian Folklore Archives at the U of A, Alberta Provincial Archives, Alberta Genealogical Archives, and others to work with in establishing a leading community.
Learning community.
Learning, sorry. Perhaps we can establish an Alberta project of locating branch archives of closed branches and checking with archival conveners or of active branches.
So the volume of work to rectify all the issues and challenges that we have listed earlier is monumental. The general topics include the various challenges we've just listed, which include the clarification of our Constitution, translation, scanning and reprinting of original copies, acquisition policy, access policy, facility to house archives, and capacity building. We don't have the skills. So in closing, well, I guess we missed that and I didn't do that. Sorry.
We're right there.
Oh, we are, sorry. So the values of archives. Does the vision of yesterday synchronize with what inspires you today, or us today? We build on the foundation of the past, moving forward, creating new pathways as we find out what we are committed to, what we care deeply about, and how we create communities relevant to the future, to future generations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Karen Lemiski, and I have the pleasure of reading her entire biographical quotation in full on this microphone. Dr. Karen Lemiski has been curator and associate director of the Basilian Fathers Museum in Mundare since 2009.
I'd like to start by giving you some background to our museum collection. The Basilian Fathers Museum owes its origins to Father Joseph Jean, a French-Canadian Roman Catholic priest who converted to the Byzantine Rite. In 1910, Father Jean was sent to Galicia to learn the Ukrainian language and Old Slavonic liturgy. But while based in the monasteries, his appreciation of the nation's art and culture also grew. Father Jean's interest in collecting artistic and cultural artifacts was a passion that remained with him throughout his life. It developed under the guidance of Metropolitan Sheptytsky, with whom he had first met in 1910 at the Eucharistic Congress in Montreal. As a leader of the social as well as the religious life in Galicia, Sheptytsky encouraged the preservation of historical items and personally funded the creation of several cultural and educational institutions. When Father Jean returned to Canada in 1912, his first assignment was to establish a missionary school in Sifton, Manitoba. In 2 rooms of the school's residence, he organized a museum that he filled with the items brought from Galicia. To this old world collection, Father Jean added items that he located near Sifton, including items from the site of the former fur trading post at Fort Dauphin. Father Jean also later established a small Ukrainian museum in Montreal. In 1913, Father Jean returned to Galicia where he joined the Basilian Order. In addition to his religious duties, including as chaplain for the Ukrainian Galician Army, Father Jean served in the diplomatic corps of the Western Ukrainian National Republic, at the Ukrainian mission in Geneva, and attending the Riga Peace Conference at the end of World War I. Later, at the end of World War II, Father Jean was named a special delegate of the Ukrainian Catholic Committee to aid Ukrainian refugees. Originally opened in 1953, work at the Basilian Fathers Museum in its first decades was centered on organizing, documenting, and displaying Father Jean's rich collection of historic objects. As a balance to the religious pieces and those assembled in Europe, many individuals, especially the descendants of the early settlers in the Beaver Lake Mundare area, donated folk objects and personal items. To these were added antiques from Father Jean's own family, including a clock his ancestors bought to Quebec in 1795. Now I'll offer some general comments on the museum collection. Logically, the Basilian Fathers Museum serves as the repository for the archives of the Order of St. Basil the Great, members of which first arrived in Canada in late 1902. This includes the personal papers, correspondence, diplomas, certificates, and other papers of the individual Basilians. the diaries of the earliest Basilians, including Father Jean, as well as all confidential documents related to church activities, are held in the Basilian archives in Winnipeg. The museum does also hold occasional diaries from non-Basilian Ukrainian clergy, including one written in 1901 by the Orthodox priest Father Jacob Korchinski, and the diary talks about his missionary work in the pioneer communities. Since 2008, work at the museum has been especially focused on what I call a stock-taking program. This involves the checking of each item in the collection, whether artifact or archival, against the current database. This reconciliation process has severely affected the progress of cataloging. Some of the discrepancies that have surfaced have been the consequence of using temporary employees. Another problem that has become apparent is that much of the information in Father Jean's original typewritten notes, which contained details on provenance, date of acquisition, etc., was not transferred into the collection's database. This issue is further complicated because the descriptions in the museum catalog make no reference to Father Jean's notes, which means that a matching process has had to take place. First, to physically locate the item in the museum collection, then to determine what new artifact number was assigned to it, and then to add in Father Jean's notes to the description in the catalog. To date, there are still a number of items in the museum that are mentioned in Father Jean's catalog that haven't been matched. A final issue that has surfaced is that numerous items that on first glance appear to have been cataloged turn out to only have been assigned an archival number without any description having been entered into the database. These numbers are usually artificial, meaning that they do not follow with the sequence we are currently using. So perhaps they are left over from an earlier attempt at a catalog. The museum collection is now broadly grouped into three categories: artifacts, archives, and our library. I'll now provide an overview of the main archival categories. Printed materials. Over the next few minutes, I'll give what will seem like a laundry list of the broad categories of printed materials that have been cataloged into our collection in the last few years. For as much as I would like to say that the museum's archives are focused around the history of the Basilian Order in Canada or Ukrainian settlements in Lamont County, they are not. We have many items that can be fit into broadly related catalogs, such as the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Canada or the Basilian Order in Europe, but still others that have no connection whatsoever, but are interesting nonetheless. In fact, I would like to say that our archives are especially strong in the history of the Roman Catholic Church in Canada because of Father Jean's original studies at the monasteries in Quebec. Much of our printed material is of an ephemeral nature, and as far as we know, not widely available to the public through other collections, or at least not in large quantities. These include pastoral letters and public sermons, beginning with one given in 1829 by the Archbishop of Constantinople, and including those by the bishops of Stanislaw and Lviv prior to World War I. Ordination booklets, ranging from the Bishop of Grenoble, France in 1873, the Bishop of Ottawa in 1886, and including all Ukrainian Catholic bishops consecrated in North America. Similarly, funeral booklets of members of the clergy, both Ukrainian Catholic and Canada's Roman Catholic hierarchs, including Bishop Grandin, the first Bishop of St. Albert, who died in 1902. The Shematismus for the Order of St. Basil the Great, dating from 1906, as well as the annual statistical handbooks from the mid-19th century from Quebec's seminaries, many of which are now defunct. Reports of the Roman Catholic missions in Quebec, along with reports of the Catholic Indian missions in the United States, similarly from the mid-19th century. Commemorative books from milestone celebrations of seminaries and religious orders in Canada, and similarly more than 600 dedication and jubilee books from Ukrainian parishes, both Catholic and Orthodox, in Canada and the United States, along with numerous service booklets from the blessing of cornerstones, altars, bell towers, iconostas, etc. Architectural drawings of Ukrainian churches built in East Central Alberta, proceedings from religious conferences, starting with the 1878 Ecclesiastic Conference in Montreal and the Diocesan Synod in Zamość in 1883, to more recent canon law meetings. Finally, community posters and theater and concert programs, primarily from Lamont County from the 1940s. In part, the reason the museum's collection is so rich in these items is because many were saved as samples from the Brazilian press, which operated in Madeira from 1938 until 1949, when it moved to Toronto. And for those of you familiar with the museum, we now have a temporary display of these posters on exhibit. Photographs. The Brazilian Fathers Museum holds a comprehensive collection of photographs illustrating daily life and special events in East Central Alberta and from other cities where the Brazilian Order is active, the United States and Brazil especially. Almost all of these images were taken by individual Brazilians and developed in the darkroom of the Madeira Monastery. To date, approximately 6,000 black and white photographs have been cataloged and scanned into electronic format. There are still numerous boxes to be sorted. In addition to the photos are an additional 2,000 envelopes of negatives, which were moved from the monastery to the museum. Each envelope is labeled by subject and contains a varying number of negatives. Eventually, these will be compared with the existing photographs and entered into their own database. Of special interest in our collection are also photo albums compiled by individual Brazilians. For example, 3 albums document daily life in the monasteries of Lesia, including a series of photos of artist Julian Buchanan painting the Brazilian chapel in Jokwa. Others are related to specific events, such as the funeral of Superior General Father Haloshinsky, who died unexpectedly in Canada while on a pastoral visit from Rome in 1952. Finally, our archives contain a number of autographed photo portraits. These include one presented to Father Krzyżanowski by Prince Skoropadsky during his visit to Canada in 1938, and another from Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent during his visit to Madeira in 1951. Pictorial materials. In addition to the photographs and negatives mentioned, the museum archives contain a large collection of prayer cards. To date, more than 4,200 unique images have been cataloged. Of these, approximately 50% document milestone dates for either Ukrainian Catholic clergy or sister servants of Mary Immaculate, such as ordinations, habit days, missions, etc. Around 10% of the cards are hand-drawn and hand-painted, and 30% include handwritten notes related to prayers or liturgies being offered for specific celebrations. Just quickly, comments on motion pictures and sound recordings. We have only undertaken the initial stages of sorting and cataloging the accumulation of films and sound recordings at the museum. But of particular concern is the preservation of these early Brazilian films. In both categories, the museum archives are comprehensive with respect to materials produced by the Brazilians and selective with respect to broader Ukrainian historic and cultural topics. Of interest among the Brazilian films is one featuring Brother Maladi, who demonstrates by the ringing of a handbell the different sequences of tones used to signal the various prayer hours or other internal messages used in the functioning of a monastery. Among the sound recordings are the tapes of Father Nitschka's weekly radio program, which was originally broadcast from the studio inside the monastery beginning in the 1950s. And with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Our next presenter is Aleksandr Makar. He completed his undergrad studies in history and education in Chernivtsi, graduate studies in history in Kiev, and he has an MBA from the University of Alberta. He has co-edited 2 books, published 20 articles, presented at 30 conferences or so in Canada and internationally. He's been a researcher and archivist at the Ukrainian Folklore Center at the U of A and executive director at UKAMA in Edmonton as well. Currently, he's a research officer at Alberta Advanced Education. And he's also my cum.
Thanks. So I'm a board member, a volunteer board member at UCAMA, and our institution was established here in Edmonton in 1972 by Grigori and Stefania Yopek. At first, all the materials were housed at their house, and later on, they, with the support of the Ukrainian community in Edmonton, bought a building in 1972, which was opened for public in 1974. Structurally, UCAMA consists of several components, namely the archival part, the museum part, a fairly expansive library, and a collection of art. And today I'll be focusing specifically on the archival part, but if you will have any questions about other components, I will gladly respond. So the mission of UCAMA is to enrich appreciation of the Alberta experience by collecting, preserving, displaying, and promoting the region's Ukrainian heritage in a creative and engaging museum environment by developing and maintaining a collection of artifacts, archival materials, and books that focuses on the Ukrainian experience in Edmonton within the broader context of the city, Alberta, Canada, Ukraine, and the world. And by providing a public service, educational opportunities, and cultural resources to the local community and visitors to Edmonton through exhibits, school programs, special events, and research facilities. We have a number of policies dealing with the archives, specifically archives acquisition policy, archives access policy, and research policy. The mandate of the archival program at UCAMA is to acquire, preserve, and make available to public for research historical records of ongoing value to the population of Alberta related to the Ukrainian heritage in this province. Based on this mandate, UCAMA acquires records of the Ukrainian community organizations and private records that reflect the diverse activities and experiences of Canadians with Ukrainian heritage in Alberta. It acquires records in all formats of media, including textual material, photographs, films, sound recordings, maps, plans, drawings, and electronic materials. So based on the mission and on the mandate, UCAMA collects its archival materials, and the main focus and subject matter of the material is on Ukrainians in this province. Primarily, I would say in Edmonton, due to the nature and the focus of the existing collections, but there are also some significant materials dealing with Ukrainians in East Central Alberta, in rural areas, as well in some other parts of the province. There are some materials from the Grand Prairie region, and there are some materials from Calgary and from southern Alberta. But still, the main focus is on Edmonton. The secondary focuses deal with Ukrainians in other provinces. In particular, there are several collections dealing with Ontario. And UCAMA has a fairly nice collection of materials dealing with Ukrainian participation in this, during the Second World War. In the past, UCAMA had very good relations and support from North Legion here in Edmonton, consisting of many Ukrainians who served in the Canadian forces during the Second World War, and many of them donated some photographs, some museum artifacts. As well, UKAMA has some collections dealing with Ukrainians in other parts of the world, in Ukraine and in Poland. As already said, UKAMA collects collections of the Ukrainian community organizations, and I can list a whole number of them. So UKAMA has Shevchenko Society in Edmonton Fonds and other fonds like Alberta Parents for Ukrainian Education Society, Ukrainian Canadian Congress Edmonton branch, Ukrainian Pioneers Association of Alberta, Ukrainian Charitable and Medical Services Edmonton branch, Ukrainian Music Association of Alberta, Ukrainian Professional and Business Club of Edmonton, Ukrainian National Home in Edmonton, and so this collection, it includes several smaller collections of the organizations that were housed at the Ukrainian National Home. And I could continue this list. We also have personal archival records, and probably you will be familiar with many of the names that I will note. There's a Julian Putzmaniuk, we have his collection, Isidor Haretsky, Mikhailo Holinsky, who was a famous Ukrainian opera singer, Ivan Lahola, who was an inmate in the Nazi concentration camps during the Second World War, Peter Lazarovich, Mike Luchkovich, who was the first Ukrainian MP elected in Canada. He was elected from Vagrevo constituency and served as MP from 1926 to 1935. We have some materials that were donated to us by the first director of HIUS, Manoli Lupo. We have some materials that were donated to us by Peter Savarin and other people. So chronologically, the materials span the whole 20th century from early 1900s and to the end of the 20th century. I would say that most of materials would be from 1960s to 1990s, but still a significant part of the documents are related to the 1920s to 1930s to 1940s. So in total, UKAMA has around 40 archival fonts and collections, approximately 35 to 40 meters of textual records. UKAMA has 5,000 plus photographs and negatives. It has video and audio tapes. It has 300 maps. It has 312 titles of newspapers. The processing, the status of the processing of the material varies from red description. More will have just more simpler kind of finding aids, and at present time UKAMA somewhat slowed the arrangement and description of its archival holdings because UKAMA is in an active phase of the construction of the renovation, rather, of the new building, and so thus most of the focus is on this project. We have one employee who looks after all of our collections. The main challenges are, as already mentioned, related to personnel and to the condition of the current building. It's an older building. All archival records, or most, I would say, of the archival records are stored in a separate room on the second floor. It does not have temperature controls, so it's a problem, but it is fairly dry. So over the years, I observed that materials have remained in a fair condition, I would say. So these are the two main challenges that we face. We provide limited access for public due to current limitations that UCAMA has. And so, as already noted, that UCAMA is in the process of renovating a building on Jasper Avenue, and this building has been nicely designed. It won architectural awards, and will have proper climate control and other features that for the archives. Thanks.
The last presenter in our panel is Lesia Perrit from the Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada. She's a retired kindergarten teacher. She oversees a program in Ukrainian language classes for adults at her parish. She's been very involved in the Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada at the branch and provincial and national levels, including a recent tenure as the national president. She's engaged in consolidating national archives of the organization. The discovery of a box of documents and letters from the national UX war effort in the 1940s further inspired her interest in preservation of Ukrainian archival history in Canada.
The Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada, UWAC, was formed as a national organization in 1926 to link existing Ukrainian women's groups. It was the first national Ukrainian women's organization. Its objectives were to support the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada, incorporated in 1918, Sunday schools, Ukrainian schools, cultural institutions, press, literary activities, folk arts, and provide assistance to the homeland. In 1976, there were 116 UWAC branches. UWAC documented its work in publication of 2 history books, authored by Kohuska and compiled 25 years of Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada, 1926 to 51, and a half century of service to the community, 1926 to 76. The National Executive is now assembling its history from 1976 to 2001 for publication. We have been gathering some archives from inactive branches and have had the contents of 55 boxes of our national records documented. In my mission to collect archives, I found a dusty cardboard box filled with documents and hundreds of letters related to the 1940 war effort of UWAC. I found letters from government officials calling for help in the war effort and subsequent UWAC directives to the branches, some of which I will share. In September 1939, Maria Tkachuk, national president, appealed to branches to raise funds for the Red Cross. In 1940, the Canadian Red Cross provided, in Ukrainian, an emergency call flyer describing its activities during the first year of the war. In early 1940, UWAC established a war fund to support the Red Cross. Branches held teas, bazaars, dances, knit items, sold clothing, and sold war bonds. With approval from the Canadian Department of National Defense, UWAC donated $1,980, value of $34,800 today, to purchase an ambulance for service in Britain. A 1940 permit for Rossburn, Manitoba branch to hold a bazaar and dance with proceeds to the Red Cross. In 1942, the National War Finance Committee wrote Anastasia Rurik, the president then, commending UWAC's contribution to the war victory loans and requesting help in the third campaign. In 1942, UWAC launched a fundraising embroidery project. Cloth, thread, and patterns were sent to branches to embroider articles for bazaars in Montreal, Toronto, and Winnipeg. Other crafts and baking were also sold. All profits were to the Red Cross. This letter advised the Association of Ukrainian Canadian Soldiers across the ocean that 29 parcels of food were sent from the national office in Winnipeg, as well as others shipped across from branches. UWAC contributed funds to the Kinsman Milk of Britain Fund. VE Day in 1945 was the beginning of a new struggle to resettle and rebuild. In March 46, our national office informed branches of shortages of food in Europe for Ukrainian soldiers. Parcels were sent to the Ukrainian Canadian Servicemen's Club for those being discharged from service, leaving hospitals and living in hostels. Our national office sent out 600 12-pound food parcels in addition to many sent directly from branches. Personal items and clothing were also shipped. Branches completed a 4-page form outlining their war effort. Although UWAC work is well summarized in our history books, I ask, is there a need to preserve the documents that provide evidence? We have 24 pages of letters written between Natalia Kohuska, the president at the time, and General Aleksandr Udovichenko in Paris. Udovichenko was the general in the army of the Ukrainian National Republic and served as vice president in Petlura's government in exile. In his letters to Mrs. Kohuska, the general describes the political situation and humanitarian needs. He distributes clothing and food sent by UWAC to ill and needy Ukrainians. He writes about the Nazi removal of books and documents from libraries. There is mention of a visit by Otech Sauchuk from Canada, that Professor Doroshenko is leaving Germany, and that the general forwarded Kohuska's personal letter to Olha, widow of Simon Petlura. What is not preserved in any book is the contents of the latter discovery and hundreds of letters we possess from Skatalci, the Ukrainian refugees in camps in England, Germany, Italy, and Austria, as well as individuals in France and Spain. They describe local conditions, their camp life, personal histories with misfortunes, wishes, and ambitions. Soldiers request correspondence from young women. Refugees ask for reading material, dictionaries, English dictionaries, as well as sheet music for secular and liturgical works. Some ask for help locating family members. We have Mrs. Kohuska's response to most letters. Our women sent salve, toiletries, clothing, food, calendars, dictionaries, books for adults and children, as well as yearly subscriptions to the Ukrainian Voice, Holus. Canadian farmers were informed of refugees' offers of work. I am not sure UWAC acted as matchmaker for men seeking wives. Slide 14. April 1947, my Minster, England. Kuzma here wants to correspond with a Ukrainian girl in hopes of marriage. Don't me call bad boy, as I changed my name and religion because I wanted to leave Russia. May 47, Tyrol, Austria. Nina hopes to immigrate from Tyrol with her family. Their situation is very difficult and they thank God for every piece of bread. Nina is losing hope. She requests cigarettes which she can sell to buy potatoes and bread. October 46, Camp 2713, Hanover, Germany. Sergei writes that there are 3,500 Ukrainians living in the camp. United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration is providing food. The Ukrainians work in factories. Their children attend school. He is grateful for receiving chocolates and the Mizar salve for his skin condition. July 47, POW Camp 78, Braintree, England. Fedor was born in Kyiv in 1920. He said he lost his mother and sister in the Holodomor. In 1937, he lost his father during the mass repressions of the NKVD. Fedor has nobody to write to and asks for help in finding people to correspond with, especially from Kyiv. He thanks UWAC for sending magazines, books, packages, and letters to the camps in Rimini, Italy, and now to England, where he is. He asks for help in printing the dramas he wrote and to send his enclosed poems under pseudonym F. Malena to any editorial office, but not a communist one. We have letters and postcards simply expressing thanks for items received. What is significant in that these writers have descendants residing some places in the world. They likely would be interested in seeing a letter written by an ancestor. There is much work to be done in preserving, digitizing, and in understanding legal implications of sharing these letters. As evidence of UWAC networking, the plight of Ukrainian refugees is described in a copy of a long letter we have from the Association of Ukrainian Women on Immigration in Munich to Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, U.S. delegate to the United Nations in London, 46. And this is in abridged form. Madam, we send you our sincere thanks and express our admiration for your courageous defense of political war refugees. You have taken simultaneously under your protection us, Ukrainians, 300,000 refugees who are political immigrants, among them children and orphans. Ukrainian women had to leave their homes in order to escape political and religious persecution. If today a forced repatriation compels hundreds of refugees to commit suicide, it is quite evident that there must be very earnest reasons for such an action. When and where was it that such great masses do not want to return home to their native country? We have no native country at present. Our home is turned into a vast concentration camp of millions deprived of rights. In the name of women, we appeal to you, use your influence to 1. Stop forced repatriation. 2. Grant us the right of asylum in a democratic country. Very sincerely, Uliana Zalevich and Irene Pavlikovska.
We are very lucky. Our panelists are very disciplined. They all did 10 minutes, right? Yes? In spite of my waving of the sign. Okay.
And what that does is that allows for us to have now a larger round table discussion. Do you have responses to the various presentations or ideas or descriptions of your situation? John Paul?
Yeah, first a comment. First a comment on the presentation by Vivian, Skakun, and Betty Buchanan. Captain Buchanan. You held up that book from Stedin with minutes. I'm involved in a project. It'll be explained tomorrow, the Sanctuary Project, where we've been going from rural parish to rural parish to rural parish. There are so many local records from the organizations of the church, from the churches themselves, from the parish committees. Usually they're kept in plastic boxes, either in the choir loft or in the sacristy behind the altar. And and actually when we photograph not the records usually, but where they're located. So that with that kind of photographic trail, it would be possible to find a lot of records. But it's really a daunting task. But maybe sometime in the future, your talk has inspired me to think there could be a project where we go around and find these records and either place them in the archives or scan them for the archives. And it would be a major project, but I think we have to be thinking in this direction, because the churches are vulnerable, the churches may go down, they may end up in private hands. we don't know how long the people who have in private hands will remember what they have, or the kids, so I do think this is a timely thing. And my second thing is just a quick question to Aleksandr Makar. Does UCAMA take digital archives, or have you been concentrating on paper?
UCAMA takes materials in all formats, but the way the collection was collected, most I would say all of the textual records are in hard copy paper form. There are plans to scan and make digitization of them, but we have not had an opportunity to do this so far. What we did, like in my presentation, I noted that UCAMA has 5,000 plus photographs at first, and negatives. Some of the photographs are originals, some of the photos are copies of the originals, and some are negatives. So several years ago we scanned all the photos that we were able to find at UCAMA, and a large part of the photos has finding aids, like old card finding aids, but then some info was entered into the computer database as well. So photos mostly are digitized. Some of the photos that were found in the building do not have description yet, but most, I would say, have finding aids. We did some digitization of the newspapers, and again, we tried to focus on those newspapers that are rare and do not exist in microfiches or microfilms in other collections. And so the Ukrainian Association of Alberta was generous and provided UCAMA with some funds to do that.
Anyone else?
I have a question to all of you. The first, it's a three-part question. First part of the question is, do you allow researchers to come in and view your archives and work from them? Two, the second part is, do you have finding aids that you make available? And the third part is, are these finding aids available online so that somebody can prepare themselves to come for the research? And if not, I guess it's a four-part question. If not, are you planning to do that so that people can focus their research when they come in and research? Thank you.
Our answers to those are all no. I'm sorry, we are not organized at all. The archives that we have previously had in the particular year that I was researching are missing. I'm assuming they're in someone's basement. This was a project that someone else had to do and didn't do, or I'm not sure what happened. They removed the archives from there and never brought them back. That's what I'm assuming. We do have archives that are more current, and we have all those that still need organizing. But no, we don't have any finding aids because all of those still are not properly documented and probably not properly done archival in any way. And so I'm sorry.
Well, there's nothing to be sorry about. You identified the problem, you know what
Yes.
you have, what you don't. It's already a huge step
Yes,
forward.
it's a massive amount of work to be done. And I would be very interested in doing a project with, with the small parishes and finding all the history of CU's branches, because they're there somewhere, and it's just we don't know where they are, and whether they're in some personal homes or in the church basement or wherever. So that's a project that probably would be important to do to retrieve and keep all the history.
Thank you, Vivian.
these letters are currently in a box in my house. And I was just astounded. I mean, and they're of course all in Ukrainian, and I was reading snippets from over the Chemka's letters. I mean, he writes a lot, and there's just a wealth of information in here, and my hope is that somehow one day we can get some of this stuff online, so people that are interested in genealogy can trace family members and see a letter. But I don't know what legal implications are. It's a mammoth project, and any direction that people might have that work with archives of such nature, I'd really like to speak with you.
Thank you, Lesia. Who doesn't have a box of materials in their house? No one. Sandra?
My answer to most of the questions is yes, but so UCAMA provides public access during its regular hours. There are some finding aids for the archival fonds, specifically like there are finding aids for Peter Lazarovich fonds. There is finding aid for Mikhailo Holensky fonds, Ivan Lahola fonds, Michael Luchkovich fonds, Mikhailo Holensky fonds, and for some other fonds. Most of the finding aids are in English, some are in Ukrainian. Many other fonds and collections do not have finding aids. So this was about textual records. Most of the photographs have a variety, I would say, finding aids. And finally, finding aids are not posted online.
Thank you, Aleksandr.
Yes, the Q's institutional archive per se, the textual materials are not being they're not available to the public, but they in time we'll see where that goes. But Aleksandr and Victoria will later be talking about the Q's digital archives program, which aims to put the core publications of the Institute, so its bulletins, its other materials, onto the internet. Those are readily available at the Q's website with no problem.
I would just like to add to that. The Q's institutional archives is housed by the University of Alberta Archives, at least the earlier portion of it. And if you're a researcher, you can, of course, request access to those materials. And in now newly built facility on South Campus, and the opening is sometime this month. But as with many other organizations, and this is related to my question to Aleksandr that I'll ask later, many organizations deposited their institutional archives in larger institutions like provincial archives, for example, or university archives. But if you look at the dates covered, they end sometime in the early 90s mostly. It's 2018 today. What's happened in that period of time? And most often we don't know. So I would like to know what Q's as well, what happened in the last few years, but I'll let Karen answer the previous question. Thank you.
So at the Brazilian Fathers Museum, we do allow researchers to come in, but what we ask is that we're given a few days' notice and a request for what you're looking to see, which makes it difficult because we don't have finding aids available. So it means you have to know, or you have to have heard that we have something to be able to ask to see it, and then we'll pull it out and give it to you. So we're kind of in a situation where, as much as I've conceived of finding aids, it becomes a prioritization. Do we take the time out of the cataloging and sorting to produce the finding aid, which puts us back behind with the cataloging. We do have a room available if somebody should want to come in, and for example, with the photographs, those are scanned and there's a database, so if somebody wants to come in and look at those or a specific document, we have a place available to them so that it is somewhat controlled access, and they have a place to work.
Thank you, Karen.
I just have a quick question for Andrij. The 140 interviews you mentioned. The 140 interviews that you mentioned, are those transcribed?
As far as I know, they're not. Yours, do you know about that? No.
That means no, that he doesn't know, or no, they're not transcribed?
What was the question? I was reading your biography.
Are the oral interviews, are those transcribed? The ones that Andrij was talking about? I guess you weren't here when he was.
Cecil Ross.
No, not Cecil Ross.
No.
Oral history.
This is the
The oral history project. Are those transcribed?
Oh, there are actually 250 entries. That's why I'm not reacting.
Yes.
Oh, there are more. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Can I have that?
That's okay.
I'm not sure we were talking about the same project, but in the 1980s, Hughes had a huge oral history project. There were two interviewers. Vivian did most of the interviews, and the Zvadic. There are 250 audio cassettes. That's why I didn't react to 150. This collection was deposited into the Bohemian Ukrainian Folklore Archives sometime in early 2000, I believe 2001. And we digitized them about 8 years ago. They are not transcribed, but they're digitized, and most of them are indexed. So what we do, we have research assistants. They're usually graduate students in the Ukrainian Folklore program, and they work 12 hours a week in the archives. So they listen to the interview and they record key personalities, institutions, time period, so that the researcher can look through it and find what they're looking for. I talked to Buchanan and I talked to Hughes about trying to find documentation about the project itself. So some documents, how it all started, whether there were waivers signed by interviewees, whether we can have, of course nobody asked the question, can we put them online in 1983, because there was no such opportunity. But I haven't been able to locate those waivers, although I was told that yes, they exist. We couldn't find them. I looked at the University of Alberta archives, hoping that the Hughes Institutional Archives would have part of this, and it was not there. So we're still in search. Meanwhile, researchers can access that collection, but we can't make it available online. That's the answer. Yeah.
What about the Cecil Ross ones?
I haven't followed up with Cecil Ross. I was in touch with Rick Stoll in this regard. It was my understanding they were supposed to go to Library and Archives Canada in due course. At the time that I was in touch with them, there was about 60% of the interviews had been transcribed, and they were still working on remaining 40%.
Other questions?
I'd like to address this to Karen. I was so impressed with the extent of your archive collection. I'm curious to know what kind of staff do you have?
This is a very easy question.
As a matter of fact, this might even apply to you, Mr. Makar, at Ukama. I mean, these are enormous collections, archival collections.
So we have a staff of one, which is also partly why when somebody wants to come out to the museum to look at our archives, we request advance notice, because I only travel out to the museum 2 or 3 days a week. We do have another girl on staff who's part-time who looks after visitors and the gift shop and such, but we are a small staff. We tried in the past to apply for summer student funding, but we find, as you well know and can imagine, having somebody on staff for 2 months who's a summer student from any discipline generally means they can maybe help with some basic sorting, but they can't really get into any of the meat of the project. So until we have some other way of having a larger staff, I think this is the slow process we'll be in.
How many institutions present here, archival institutions, have a full-time permanent archivist on staff? I'm wondering. Well, I know the answer. We have James here, but this is university archives. So it's different. Well, thank you. Just do you understand? Okay.
Currently, UCAMA has one employee who is Greg Borowitz, and he's here with us today. And Greg looks after all our collections and all other needs, operational needs that UCAMA has. So he has like huge tasks over this that he's looking at. And we do not have an archivist who looks specifically at the archives at this time.
Thank you. Any other questions?
One question that's interesting to me is interaction among and between archives. Do we have any, or can any people from the panel, or maybe any people from the room in general, speak of situations where two archives have talked to each other and collaborated with each other? That would be very interesting for me.
Well, this is sort of obvious what I'm about to say. That is, when our museum, the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, Alberta branch, receives donated artifacts or whatever, if they don't fit within our mandate, we do forward them on to either the KUL or the UCAMA or whatever. But that is one way so it's important to know exactly what the other museums and archive collections are about, what they accept.
Can I add something? But you also do coordination with the exhibits. So you've also done exhibits with the other museums as well. So we have the Catholic Women's Association and our Women's Association, Ukrainian Women's Museum, rather. Yes, so you've done joint projects as well.
I just want to add that in the last year I've had the privilege of working with all of the archives, both on the 5 Waves of Inspiration exhibit that was at the Edmonton Art Gallery, and for the Images of Faith exhibit that the KUL Folklore Center coordinated, and our new Love Letters from the Past exhibit that some of you did not get a chance to see last night that we had a chance to put up. And there are many opportunities to collaborate, it's just there's very few of us to do it. And it would be great to have a bigger community to work on it because we're limited that way. That's what I've been able to see.
Now.
I found the presentations to be very interesting. I have a question which I think has some relevance today. I think any archival collection invites researchers and people that are interested in material to come in and look at them. If we have university personnel coming in, it goes without question. Anonymity, confidentiality is the bottom line. When you have members of Joe or Josephine public coming in to view archival material, how do you guarantee or try to assure that the information that they look at will not be used maliciously, identity fraud? Have you thought about that, or is that a concern? I think it is.
I'm sure Irene can answer this. Well, it's what you were talking
I'm not sure I can answer how to avoid any of these, but there are procedures that archives and archivists, people working in archives should take. Even just registering your researchers, having some contact information, verifying who is coming into your archives, and making sure that who they say is who they are by showing a driver's license or some kind of identification. I mean, that's kind of standard practice in larger institutions. So you can kind of try to mitigate any kind of malicious gathering of information that way. The other thing is knowing what you have in your archive and knowing whether there are personal information, like pockets of things that should be protected, and having conversations with the donor before they're made available, and understanding how the donor wants to protect that privacy. There's no way of protecting it totally, because there are ways, people find ways to get around things all the time, but there are steps you can take to mitigate any kind of identity theft. I mean, we've had people coming in to look at vital statistics records at the provincial archives, and who knows, besides genealogy, what information they are gleaning for other things. So you can try and protect the information by putting steps in place and procedures in place. But I don't know if you can totally protect it forever, all the time. But that's okay. I have a question. Sorry. I wanted to ask, and let me just lob this into the middle of the conversation. Is it possible, would it be a good idea to develop a consortium of institutions that have archives to pool resources, to have these people available to, whether it's on a rotating basis, to work at the archive, so that people who are staff poor can have some trained people coming in at a regular basis. I mean, this is a huge project just to coordinate it. But it's something that maybe as a community we should be looking at, thinking about, to pool resources, both human resources and financial resources, to pay for these people to come and do the work. Whether it's conservation, whether it's an archivist to do the work, or other staff, and not just relying on temporary. But I mean, really, let's think about how we can make our community work together for the future, and not just sort of flounder and worry about things we can't control. Sorry, I don't mean to be a downer, but
no, that's a great, very optimistic approach, and you're saying something from my tomorrow presentation. So, but I'm sure people, and Lesia is going to talk about the committee that UCC National put together last year at their Congress in Vivian, also tomorrow. So we're not going to be stealing anyone's thunder, but maybe someone wants to respond to Irene's initiative. I'm sure the panelists, but also other participants.
This is, for me, a very thought-provoking conference. And while I'm listening, I'm putting together a long list of things which should be done. And I'm trying to think from the university side and come up with some possible solutions. And of course, one of the important solutions would be to have around the Kiel Folklore Center, or maybe between Kiel Folklore Center and Kiev, to have a summer training camp, summer school for Ukrainian and not only Ukrainian youth, for students, to train them to volunteer in archives, to send to archives not just random volunteers, but trained volunteers. And maybe also to have a course for students to take, which would be part a training and part a project, and you are trained and then you go somewhere, you work for an archive and then you get your credits and maybe, I don't know, some financial support to continue during summer period, something like that. But this is a very thought-provoking, and it feels that we do have resources, we just need to think about them and pull them together.
We always have some.
So in the fall, I had the opportunity to sit in on a meeting between the university research centers, the Ukrainian university research centers, Kyiv School, PCUH, etc. And I think something similar can happen here, where there's like one representative of each archive, and once or twice a year they meet up, they talk about what's going on. They possibly have a student come in and help to create a list of what is in the archives and put that online, make that accessible. Something similar to that.
I was going to say the Ukrainian Pioneers Association paid a couple of years ago for Andrij Makuch to go to take an archives course offered by the provincial government in Calgary. And I don't know, what's that?
It's not provincial, what else?
Anyways, I think that that's an opportunity to train some people. The only thing is that he got such a good education, he ran off and abandoned us and went to work for the
Brain drain.
That was Archives Institute, offered by the Archives Society of Alberta.
Yeah, it wasn't in Calgary. It was a provincial archive.
Well, they rotate. They have 1 year in Edmonton at the BA usually, and then the second year is Calgary, so that they cover the south of the province. It's a 6-week intensive course, and it's kind of like an introduction into archival science for not trained archivists, but those who are archivists on a daily basis because we take care of collections. This happens usually in April every year. Archives Society of Alberta gets students from different provinces, mostly Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. And it's a very, very, I think, great opportunity. It costs around $800, so I don't think every student can afford to invest this kind of money in themselves. But if you have dedicated volunteers, it doesn't have to be a student. If you have a dedicated volunteer who is willing to and who is there for years to come, it's a very great investment, I believe, to train them.
Yeah. Just a quick addition to that. Most of us who are in organizations in Alberta have casino money that would apply to sponsoring a student to do that. So think about that when you've got your casino money coming up next.
Very true.
This is called the Archives Institute, run by the Archives Society of Alberta. It is an annual thing, Calgary or Edmonton, and it's every year, April, May. And the Archives Society of Alberta, if the person is a member of Archives Society of Alberta, there is an opportunity to get travel funding as well, so that will reduce the cost of that. And as far as I know, even now, it's the best quick archival training that is available in the province, because we don't have an archival school in the province. There is a library program, but there is no specific archival school. So in terms of quick intensive training, the Archives Institute is probably the best option. It's a little bit costly, but if the person, if it's an investment on the part of the organization, it's probably worth it.
Tomorrow, late morning, we will have a presentation from the executive director of the Archives Society of Alberta, Rini, and the Archives Advisors. She teaches the course usually with several invited practitioners, archivists, and I teach the database portion of it. So it's really a great opportunity. And I also know for younger folks who are looking for jobs, I know that many archives, archival institutions, do hire those who have an archives institute behind themselves, because it is a great asset, and I know that those students, those applicants always have better chances of getting a job.
Can you just tell me what the name of this, who offers this course, because I couldn't catch it?
Archives Society of Alberta. And their website is archivesalberta.org. And tomorrow you'll hear more, and I'm sure she'll bring some brochures for everyone. Yeah. Well, we almost ran out of time, but if anyone has last question, yes, James.
This is just responding to Andrij's question about institutions collaborating. We did collaborate with Osarazos regarding a digitization project, and that was our photographs and their Ivan Bogavsky collection. So that was online, and that was basically financed through Manitoba Heritage Funds, through a grant program. The only problem is, once Osarazos redid their website, we can no longer have access to those, their portion of the photographs. So they're trying to fix that. But that was a sort of a project that we worked with them.
Thank you.
And I neglected to mention that Sofika Kalshin from Osaradek was actually coming to this conference. She even bought a ticket, but then some health issues prevented her from coming. But she was one of those who were supposed to be here. Yeah.
I think this was a wonderful and very successful roundtable. Congratulations to all the panelists and also to all the other participants.